Good morning, everyone. I'm Laura Barrera, Managing Editor with No-Till Farmer, and I'd like to welcome you to this morning's No-Till Farmer webinar. Today, we are going to hear from Dexter, Missouri no-tiller Johnny Hunter on his experiences with cover cropping. Johnny has a 5,400-acre farm, and he recently made the transition to no-till with the help of cover crops. He will be able to share his successes and struggles with jumping feet first into cover cropping. Today's No-Till Farmer webinar is sponsored by KB Seed Solutions. They are the producers of KB Supreme and KB Royal Annual Ryegrass Seed and marketers of the Nitro Radish. We want to thank KB Seed Solutions for making today's webinar possible. We also, of course, want to thank our presenter, Johnny Hunter, for sharing in today's webinar the many things he's experienced with cover cropping. Before we turn things over to Johnny, there are a couple of housekeeping items we want to make you aware of. On your screen, there is an orange box with a white arrow inside of it. You can click on that and it will open up to reveal a question or comment field that will allow you to submit questions at any time during the presentation. At the end of the webinar, we will look to answer as many questions as possible. If for any reason the webinar is disrupted or you seem to be disconnected from the webinar, just go back to the invitation email you received and rejoin the webinar through the link in the email, just as you did today when you logged in. With that said, thanks again for joining us, and I will turn the controls to no-tiller Johnny Hunter. Good morning to you, Johnny.
Good morning to you, and thank you for having me. And good morning to everybody out there. I feel a little silly talking to people about this because I'm so new to it myself. We started no-tilling in 2012 and 2013. We started introducing cover crops and diverse mixes onto our farm. So when I say I'm still in the learning phase, I am. Uh, if you tuned in today to listen to an extra talk on cover crops and no-till, I'm afraid you may have found the wrong man. But what I have done is I've tried a lot of things, and we're trying to make cover crops and no-till work in the Mid-South, the Mississippi River Delta, and we're trying to make it work in a furrow irrigated system. Uh, so let's jump right into this. Where am I at? So here's the state of Missouri, obviously, and here's Stoddard County. I farm about 5,400 acres through Stoddard County and the very north end of New Madrid County here. So this just kind of gives you an idea. The North Mississippi River Delta extends into Scott, Stoddard, Dunklin, Pemiscot, this area right in here. So if you drive through this area of southeast Missouri, and you continue on into Arkansas and Mississippi and Louisiana, it all looks very similar. When you get up here into Cape County, this is a whole nother geographic location. Lots of dry land acres, cattle acres, dairy acres. You know, so southeast Missouri is quite different from the rest of the state. But what we're finding, and what I tell people all the time is the principles of soil health hold true no matter where in the world you're standing. And so it doesn't matter if you're here in Stoddard County or if you're up here in Atchison or if you're up here in Canada. It simply does not matter. What matters is your ability to adapt to your local conditions and to figure this thing out. Let's jump back here. I want to make note that the title of my presentation is called Improving Soil Health, and not just called Cover Crops and No-Till. Cover crops and no-till are how I get to soil health. They're not the only way I'm going to get there, but they're a big piece of the puzzle. And so I feel on my farm that a healthy soil is a more profitable soil. And I feel like that's going to be able to help keep me in business. So here's me, Johnny H. Hunter II. I'm 33, been married for 6 years. I've got a 3-year-old daughter, 1-month-old son. I'm a third-generation farmer, and I'm highly leveraged. So I don't put the highly leveraged part in there to be cute, but I want you to know that you're not talking to a farmer who's playing on house money. I've got financial institutions that I have to keep happy. I've got a banker that I've got to keep happy, and they've been really pleased with what they've seen on my farms with our improved cash flow due to the cover crops and no-till. Here's my main farming entity. It's Heartland Family Farms. We farm 5,400 acres of corn, popcorn, cotton, soybeans, furrow irrigated rice, and furrow irrigated pie pumpkins. I've got the asterisk here by cotton. I actually lost my cotton crop this year due to extreme rains and extremely cold temperatures. And so I am a cotton farmer. I just don't have any cotton. I'm 90% furrow irrigated. I'm 10% dry land. And I started this venture, this Heartland Family Farms, in 2016. And I am in the middle of an ownership transition process with a retiring farmer in this partnership. So that's this ownership transition is what's got me to this size that I'm at. I didn't put it on here, but people always want to know. I'm 20-inch row spacing, and so I'm 20-inch row corn, 20-inch row soybeans. We also drill soybeans, and then we have 40-inch row cotton. This is another entity I farm with. This has been around since '06. Jay's Hunter Farms LLC. We just recently bought 28 Black Angus cows. We've got 10 calves on the ground, and I'm hoping to start a grass-fed beef business with this. And I'm hoping to start some organic production possibly in 2017 on 40 acres. So why do I want to improve my soil health? These are pictures from my farm, the Cache River Farm we call it. And this is what you find very typical in southeast Missouri. These were 38-inch row beds. Here's the furrow irrigated middle, and then you would have a dry middle and then a furrow irrigated and so on and so forth. So this is the system that I used to farm under. Lots of tillage, lots of exposed soil, and I made really good yields doing this up until 2012. In 2012, we had the worst drought that I've certainly ever seen and most people have ever seen in southeast Missouri. And it showed me how fragile that this system truly is. This system would not infiltrate water. This system did not retain moisture. The system was very susceptible to weather conditions. So moving from there, there's no soil health here. There's only a brown medium that I'm using to grow my crops. So I'm wanting to improve my soil health so I can improve my cash flow, so I can stay in business. So how am I going to do that? I'm going to use cover crops and what I call almost no-till. Now, the name of this publication is No-Till Farmer, not Almost No-Till Farmer. But, with furrow irrigation right now, I have to call myself almost no-till. So cover crops, I'm trying to have a living root in the soil for as many days out of the year as possible. I'm planting a diverse mixture of these cover crops. And through that diversity, I get increased soil biology, and I'm going to get increased chances of a successful cover crop. If you put two things out and one thing fails, you've had a 50% loss. If I put 10 things out and one thing fails, I've had a 10% loss. So it's kind of risk management for me too. I'm not saying that I put 10-way mixes out yet. I'm not quite there yet. I'm working my way that direction. But and then almost no-till, I've had to abandon kind of preconceived notions in southeast Missouri that you cannot no-till in a furrow irrigated cropping system. What I'm doing is I'm making one minimum disturbance tillage event to form a water trench, to form a trench for my furrow irrigated water to travel down through my fields. Our fields are laser leveled. Most of them fall from either 1/10 to 1/10.5 fall through the field. So that's, about an inch every 100 feet. I think that's how that works. So I've got to have a way to get my water from one end to the other, so that's where that falls in. So why am I trying to do no-till? What's the point of no-till? Well, it's pretty simple, really. Tillage destroys the soil structure and it disrupts the biology. I could have left just that sentence in right there, and that's enough reason to do no-till. But it also lowers your organic matter. Tillage tools are expensive. I think everyone can agree on that. I think tillage takes too much time, and just the tillage operations itself, it's just an expensive enterprise. So why not? Let's just get rid of it. Why covers? There's so many reasons why covers for me, but here's some of my favorites. In the winter months, we're protecting our soil, we're reducing erosion, we're mining nutrients. we're creating porosity, we're making nitrogen for our cash crops. You know, during the growing season, we see cover crops able to hold back weed pressure, especially pigweeds, which we fight tooth and nail in the Missouri Delta. You know, they're going to capture and infiltrate these spring and summer rains, lower our soil temperature, reducing plant stress, habitat for beneficial insects, and, you know, we're trying to, you know, save money at every turn. So if you've got a healthier plant, you know, it's more able to fight off disease, and maybe you can lower your need for fungicides. So guys want to know, and I get a lot of questions about how I choose a cover crop. Well, it's as simple as educating yourself on what each species characteristics are, and then just trying it. But things that I consider about each field, or I try to, on my farm, is I consider what's my drainage here. Drainage is an issue in southeast Missouri. We've got one of the biggest drainage systems in the world, really. But when we receive high amounts of rainfall, the ditches back up. You know, the side ditches, the little ditches, the big, everything backs up, and we can get flooded, and that can kill your cover crop. So I consider my drainage. I consider my crop rotation. What do I know? Do I know that there's a problem in a field? You know, and what problem might that be? Does the field have bad compaction? Does the field have bad nematodes? So on and so forth. Does it have really low organic matter? What's my budget? You know, it'd be great to be able to spend $65 an acre on a cover crop in every field every year, but it just doesn't always work that way. You know, again, you know, we're trying to make cover crops, you know, fit into our cropping plan and our cash flow. And so, I mean, it's just like any other business. It's an expense, but I feel the return on investment is far and away going to cover the cost of it. What's my cover crop and no-till experience? You know, I'm not going to jump in there, or I try not to, and plant 1,000 acres of a cover crop that I have no experience with. And I'm going to try to stick with things that I know. If I don't know it, I'm going to try to keep it on a scale that's acceptable. So, and what's my no-till experience? Is my no-till experience pretty limited? Say on a Sharkey clay gumbo over here with a cover crop. Say I'm going to no-till rice into Sharkey clay gumbo that's got a cover crop on it. What's my experience there? Do I want to have 600 acres of that, not knowing what I'm doing, or should maybe we try half of it or a fourth of it? I don't always practice what I preach. Sometimes I tend to jump in too big. But for the people that are listening, I hope you're smarter than me. So, and what's my goal for the cover crop? What do I want it to do? Do I want it to make nitrogen? Do I want it to break compaction? Do I just want biomass? Is it just a sand blow and we're just trying to keep the sand from blowing away? You know, what's your goals? And so to take all of these things and consider each one of them, then you can start to come up with a cover crop. But you've got to understand what the cover crops do first and foremost. And there's a lot of great resources out there. KB Seeds has a lot of good information, a lot of good literature out there. Walnut Creek Seeds has excellent information, excellent website. Green Cover Seed. If you've never been on greencoverseed.com, then you're really missing the boat, because they've got one of the finest cover crop websites in the world. There, I said it. They've got the best cover crop website in the world, and they've got a calculator that helps you design mixes. And Keith Burns leaves that thing on there, and you can use it at no charge, and he's a saint for doing it, because I'm on there all the time. So let's talk about choosing the right cover crop. I talked to you a lot there just a bit about how I go about it, but let's get down to some nuts and bolts. So here's one of my fields. This is a real field. I call it Toppertown. It's #1. There's 7 of these fields on Toppertown. They are 60-acre fields. So I've got a corn crop in there now. I've actually got popcorn, but I handle them the same way. My next crop's going to be soybeans. The drainage is good. I know I've got compaction, and I know I've got low organic matter. So that needs to be on my radar. Uh, for soybeans, I like to spend between $25 and $30 an acre. I feel like I can really achieve a lot of goals with that budget. And so here's my goals. I'm going to reduce my compaction. I want to lower my weed pressure and increase organic matter. The weed pressure in these fields aren't extremely high, but you know, reducing these three things, reduce compaction, lower weed pressure, and increase organic matter, I think we should make this a goal on every farm in the country, unless you're Dave Brandt or Gabe Brown or people that have been doing this stuff for a lot longer than I have. Then, but your average run-of-the-mill farmer, these are basically, entry-level problems that everybody's got. So what's my mix on this field going to be this year? It's nothing too terribly sexy, but this is a pretty good mix that we've used in the past. We're going to probably come in with cereal rye, and we'll either use winter oats or black oats. We're going to use red clover and a daikon radish. So how did I come up with this? Well, I said I wanted to reduce compaction. So the red clover's got a really good taproot, and obviously so does the radish. So these are going to kind of work on my deeper compaction issues. The cereal rye and the winter oats, they're going to work on my shallow compaction issues. But these two, these aren't necessarily the bullets we always put in our gun whenever we have severe compaction issues. But again, it's, we're talking about a soybean crop, so I want cereal rye in the mix. Lower my weed pressure. We fight these pigweeds up here in soybeans and cotton like you guys wouldn't believe. And there's two cover crops I found that pigweeds absolutely hate, and that's a good thick stand of cereal rye and the daikon radish. You can really take a bite out of crime with those two. And so increase organic matter. Again, we're coming back to these two grasses right here. I'm going to try to probably put 25 to 30 pounds of cereal rye and 20 to 25 pounds of winter oats. And so trying to get that carbon nitrogen ratio, up a little bit on the soybean side, because I'm wanting that biomass. I'm wanting to get that process started. So let's look at another example. So here's another farm we have. This is the Malden farm. It's 80 acres. This field's 80 acres. It's in soybeans. It's going to go to field corn. Drainage on this farm is average at best to somewhat poor. It's a heavier soil type, and it takes the water a lot longer to get off, and flooding on this farm can be a real issue. And so I've got to keep that in the back of my mind whenever I'm choosing this cover. And then, again, it's prone to flooding. It's got heavy compaction and low organic matter. All of our soils in southeast Missouri have low organic matter. You're going to get tired of me saying that, but I'm going to put it in there. So going to corn, I bumped the budget a little bit. Corn, I kind of splurge a little bit. I'll go to $30 to $40 an acre, and where that increase in price is coming from is I'm going to have more legumes out there. I like the thought of making the nitrogen, for the corn crop. Do I know exactly when my nitrogen is going to go to that corn crop? No, because there's so many outside factors that determine that. But if I've got it there, and if it's in the reservoir, the corn's got a shot to get it. So let's talk about we're going to build nitrogen. Obviously, corn crop's a heavy user of nitrogen, but your cover crop is going to be a user of nitrogen too. So you got to think too. Hey, we can help feed this cover. I'd like to break some compaction up on this farm. This is a heavy clay again, and I want to try to break through some of these heavy clay layers to increase my water infiltration. That's one of my goals on this farm, and I want to build organic matter. So here's where I'm going to turn to annual ryegrass, and I put in big letters, of known origin and species. Guys, you can't just go to town and tell your co-ops, hey, I want cover crop. What do you want? Well, give me annual ryegrass and give me crimson clover and give me radish. If you do that, your co-op is probably going to give you the cheapest thing they can get their hands on, or they're going to get you whatever they can get their hands on. And what you've got to understand is cover crops are like cash crops in that there's different species, there's different brands, And you guys need to do some research and find out what you're buying. If you buy a VNS annual ryegrass, well, then no one wants to hear you come back next year and complain about not being able to kill it, because you don't know what you're going to get. VNS stands for variety not stated. Sure, it's going to be half as much as what a name brand annual ryegrass is going to be, but what good does that really do you whenever the results aren't any good? So I'm going to do, I'd say 5 to 7 pounds, probably closer to 5 pounds of annual ryegrass. And then I'm going to use Alsike clover, Persian clover, and red clover. These two have a history of being able to put up with some winter conditions. Legumes in wet conditions is kind of an area where we're trying to see what fits. I've had good luck with both of these, and so I'm going to stick with them. Red clover, I'm going to put it in there this year. I don't know how it's going to handle the water, but again, red clover's got a good taproot to it, so I want to help really work on this compaction. And again, I'm coming back with the Dakin radish. The only reason I would leave this Dakin radish out is if these soybeans were to come off. Let's say these soybeans reach maturity and we didn't have any rain in sight, and I could not fly this cover crop in. One of my rules, famous by Ray Archuleta, if it's dry, don't fly. Dry, don't fly. And I think that's important for you guys to remember that, because you can't just throw this seed out on top of the dry ground and not get rain for a month and then wonder, oh, why didn't my cover crop work? Well, these guys are full of it. Well, you didn't germinate your seed. So, if it's dry and I don't fly, I'm going to have to come back behind the combine in these soybeans and I'm going to drill this. And let's say I don't get in there till maybe the end of October. At the end of October, I feel like we're running out of time. We've probably ran out of time to do a lot of good with our Dakin radish, and I'll probably take that out of the mix. If I've already bought it, I'm going to put it in the shed and leave it for next year, and then just run with what I've got here. So there's a couple of examples of how I come about my mixes. And again, this is a learning process for me. I have yet to put out the exact same two mixes and the exact same rates twice. And that's because I always feel like there's something I can tweak. I can do this a little bit better. Maybe I had too much radish. Maybe I had too much grass and not enough legumes. And so we're trying to figure out what works in Southeast Missouri. And that's important for you guys to remember. I hope guys aren't taking their pens and pieces of paper and frantically writing down my mixes, because unless you live near to me, there's no guarantee that my mixes are going to work for you. Now, they might, and I hope they do, but this is what we're doing. This is what working on our farm. Your farm is probably going to be different, and you're going to have to do your own experimentation and have your own trials and tribulations and failures. Failing at cover crops is a part of the process. If you're not failing at cover crops somewhere, chances are you're not using cover crops. But the idea is we're gonna give it our best shot. We're gonna give these covers the best opportunity we can to do what they need to do, which is to put a living root in the soil and start the process and getting your biology fired up. And you want to know what all cover crops can specifically do, Google some Ray Archuleta talks on YouTube and just sit back and enjoy. So let's talk about planting the cover crop. We've kind of got the past, we've got the present, and we've got the future. So in the past, I've used just a simple spreader buggy from my local co-op in the cornfields, and then I follow that with a flail shredder, and I just shred my corn stalks. That worked really great. It's slow, and the buggies don't always do a very good job, but it works. If you want a low-cost, entry-level way to get a cover crop in behind the corn, this is a pretty good option. If you don't have a flail shredder, then maybe you could run some sort of chopper tool. I would not advise a bush hog. We tried this. A lot of bush hogs windrow the corn stalks to one side, and so you'll have a big pile of corn stalks over here and bare soil over here. And it doesn't always do a very good job. I say that because we tried it on about a round or two, and I didn't like the way it was working, and so we went and got the flail shredder out. Flail shredders are a headache to maintain and own and operate, but it is what it is. So, and another thing too, behind corn, I always feel like if a guy wants to start with cover crops, I feel like behind the corn crop is your best opportunity to start. Because you've got the maximum amount of time you're going to have in your operation. Another option would be the airplane, and I've done this quite a bit. I've flown it into a standing cornfield, and then I've harvested the corn, and then I've just walked away. This works too, but like the spreader buggy and the airplane, this is going to require a significant rain event to make this work. In the past, I've just done limited drilling. I've had a little John Deere 20-foot 1560 box drill, and for all you guys that own a 20-foot drill, you understand when I say that it is slow. It's painfully slow, and so it doesn't always satisfy my need to go 100 miles an hour and get hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of acres done a day, and it certainly won't accommodate the scale of farming that I've been doing. At 20-foot wouldn't. So in the present, what I did last fall was I had 38 intro beds. We went back, let's go back here. I had all these big 38 intro beds all over my ground. And so I decided I didn't want these 38 intro beds anymore. I've been cover cropping and no-tilling for 2 years on these, or 3 really. And they were getting in bad shape. Combines, spray rigs, tractors, spreader trucks. You can imagine trying to keep a good bed with all that traffic. Eventually, these beds just got in really bad shape. I wanted to go narrow row corn and beans anyways. So, I committed what I consider the ultimate no-till sin. We pulled out the disc, we pulled out the cultivator, and we went to tearing these beds down. And so I disced my beds down in one pass. The spreader truck came through, and then I followed that with a field cultivator. Here's 3 little sad faces. That's how I felt doing that. I felt pretty sad, but it's kind of like taking your kid to the doctor, to get a shot. You see the shot, it's hurting them, and it's causing them pain, and it causes you pain, but in the long run that's going to be better for their overall well-being. And that's what it was for me. I wanted to get away from beds. I didn't want them anymore. They were holding me back from moving forward. So we had to get rid of them, pull the Band-Aid off and go on down the road. I did use an airplane this past fall too. And a lot of this, though, was on work ground. So we didn't have a very good fall for getting a stand of cover crops. The rains came late, but I still got a stand everywhere. Some better than others, but I think I think the airplane's still an important tool. Spreader trucks just kind of fill the need. In the future, what am I doing in the future? Well, this year I've got a 42-foot John Deere 1890-1910 air seeder, air drill, set on 7.5-inch spacings, and this thing is going to chase the corn combine off. So I've got over 1,000 acres of field corn to get out, and I've got 700 to 800 acres of popcorn to get out, and this is going to be going right behind it. On the soybean side, we're just going to kind of play it by ear. If the soybeans are going to come out early, which it's not really looking like they are, but if they do, I'm going to get this airplane flying with a good weather forecast, and we're going to get that seed out on the ground. Let's talk about terminating the cover crop. So in the past, like I said, I keep changing things because I want to see if there's a better way. I want to see if there's any other, better ways to do things than what I'm doing. So in the past, I've used Gramoxone for all my mixes without annual ryegrass, and then I used Roundup, Sharpen, and Select with my annual ryegrass, and this program was great. Why I got away from this program, I don't really know. Sometimes I just change things to make life harder on myself. So presently, what I'm going to be doing, what I did this year for my rice, I used Roundup and Sharpen to burn down my cover crop. For my corn and soybeans, I used Roundup and Verdict. And for my cotton, I came in early with Roundup and Dicamba. And so, again, I lost all this cotton, so I had to come back and do another burn down for my soybeans. And I used Roundup and Verdict because I had come back over a month later to plant my soybeans. All of this worked pretty good. Where I did have trouble this year, where I missed in a few places, was with my annual ryegrass. And what I think was the big culprit was my cold temperatures that we had to spray in, and the fact that I thought that I was, I probably got a little ahead of myself thinking I could take the Select out, and I lowered my rate from 40 ounces of Power Max down to 32. And so old John got a little cocky, and it came back and it bit me in the butt. And so we've got to respect these cover crops, not just annual ryegrass, but all of them. I missed on some dwarf Essex rape too, where I didn't have. I may have ran maybe an ounce of Sharpen, and I should have ran a little bit more, maybe an ounce and a half. Maybe bump my MSO up to 20 ounces as opposed to just a pint. So in the future, I'm going to get tougher, and I'm going to make darn sure that when I make a termination pass, that it's going to be, significant. So all my annual ryegrasses mixes this year are going to have Roundup, Sharpen, and Select. I want 2 modes of action in there. And I don't think that's a bad idea. I've talked to a lot of other people who use Roundup 1 year, who use a 48 ounce of Roundup on year 1, and year 2, they come back with a really heavy rate of Select. And they alternate back and forth so that we don't create a resistance issue. These are 2 completely different modes of action between Roundup and Select. They achieve the same result. And I think that's really good. That's a really good thought. And I'm not convinced that I won't do that too. We really like the Sharpen for killing our broadleaves, but you've got to have good water coverage. You've got to run a lot of water, and that's just, part of life. On my corn ground, I really want to go back to my Gramoxone so that I can run 28004 as the carrier. I want to be able to get some nitrogen out early on that residue to get the process of cycling those nutrients started. If your soil is a factory, the workers are fueled by nitrogen. And so what you don't want to do is plant corn into the factory, throw nitrogen out there, thinking that your corn crop is going to get it, and the workers actually end up with it, and they start cycling those nutrients. We do run in-furrow on all our corn ground. This year I kind of did some splits where I didn't run it, and I did. I saw big differences this year. But again, we had a wet, cold spring in southeast Missouri. Soybeans, I'm going to run either Roundup or Gramoxone with Verdict. And cotton, I'm either going to run Roundup or Gramoxone with Dicamba Dual, on my cotton ground. And, the difference between Roundup and Gramoxone, I don't know. I like them both. Gramoxone, what I really like about Gramoxone is very quickly whether or not you got the job done at burn down. Roundup, sometimes it can take a while. And sometimes you're left wondering, did I get it? Did I get it? Did I get it? And all of a sudden, no, you didn't. Well, then if you have bad weather move in, then you're kind of behind the eight ball. But, Roundup still has its place and Gramoxone has its place. But you guys have to make that decision for yourself. I can't make it for you. I spray all these right in front of the planter, either a week or two in front of the planter in the most extreme instances. But more often than not, it's within that same week. And I've gone up to 48 hours. I'll spray on Monday and I'll plant on Wednesday. And I've had, really good success with that, especially with soybeans. Soybeans just seem to be impervious to all cover crops. I've planted them in some of the worst conditions imaginable, and they just don't care. They'll just come up and they're gone. Corn's a little bit more finicky. Cotton for sure is finicky, and we're going to have to really adjust what we're doing on our cotton planting. So for you guys that are listening, there may be a few furrow irrigators out there who are, punching a hole in their computer screen saying, you can't water with cover crops. What is this guy even talking about? This is how I'm doing it. This is a minimum till cultivator. I know the word minimum till cultivator, that's an oxymoron. I've heard the jokes. But this is the first version of the tool we built. I'm just basically running these two blades. I've got these on a Orthman better lister, and we pull the listers out and we slide these in, and it's a parallel linkage lister. And so these two disc blades are the heart and soul of the whole machine. But I ran this machine for 2 years and really liked it. I did have a little trouble with my linkage here not holding up to some tough conditions, which is why I went over to the Orthman bar. Here's kind of what it looks like for what we're doing. I know some of you may not be irrigators, but I feel like irrigators don't get talked to enough, so we're going to go through this. This is just an example of what these disc blades do. They don't throw a lot of dirt. They just kind of part it. They part it to the side, and that's really what you want. You don't want a lot of disturbance. Here's what it looks like when I run it through my cover crops. This is a soybean field, and again, you can see I had a good thick stand cereal rye. We came through, we made our water furrow, and there goes the water from the high end to the low end. You see I had a little hairy vetch trying to come back in here, a few other little weeds. We probably had to come back and get those posts. But whenever this soybean crop canopies, you'll smother a lot of those out. Here's another picture of how we make our water furrows. I can operate this thing 6 to 9 miles an hour. It's very adaptable, and you can set it for a lot of different soil types, and it just works, and it's one of the best tools I've ever been across. So here's some more pictures of kind of what my farm would typically look like. I chose this spot. We had some chemical overlap here, a double spray was why it's so much thinner right here. And so here's what it looks like before we come in. It's just no-tilled right into the cover crop, and it's just a solid mat of residue. It really looks good. And so we've ran our cultivator now, and now I'm irrigating, and the water's just kind of making its way down through there. And then here's what it looks like after. You can kind of see the trench right there. The trench isn't huge. It's about 6 inches deep by 8 inches wide, and that's how we take care of business. It's important to note that while I am furrow irrigated, I'm looking down the road, and I'm hoping for a time to where I can start to phase out a lot of this irrigation, and it's going to take me some time to do it. But we receive 50 inches of rainfall in Avugula, Missouri, and when you tell guys up in North Dakota how much rain we get and how much irrigation we do, they laugh at you. We do have a lot of heat and a lot of humidity, but I think with a healthy soil, we can really scale back the amount of irrigation that we have to do. And I have noticed that through my cover cropping experiences that I've been able to incrementally scale back how much I have to water. So, we've got we've got about 20 minutes left. I wanted to leave plenty of time for questions for guys. And here's my email address. I am on Twitter. Feel free to, shoot me an email if you have any questions that I don't get to today. But just know that a lot of things we're doing, may be specific to my operations, but that the principles of soil health will apply no matter where you're standing. And with that, I'd like to open it up for questions and anybody might have.
All right. Yes, Johnny, we do have a couple questions that came in. One of the first ones we had a couple regarding the budgets you shared on your cover crops. Some people are wondering whether that was just for seed or if it also includes establishment and termination costs too.
That for me is strictly seed cost. So when I say I'm going to spend $25 or $30 an acre, that's just what it costs me to get the seed in my possession. So that's blending, that's shipping, that's everything. And so the cost on top of that would be the cost of application. So whatever it's going to cost me to either drill it or fly it in. And then the cost of termination is going to be on top of that.
All right. Another question we have is regarding flood irrigation. This person is wondering whether the increased infiltration from the cover crops makes flood irrigation more challenging. For example, do you have more infiltration at the beginning of the row and less available at the end of the row?
It will make flood irrigation more challenging, but I find that the challenges versus the benefit are well worth it. So one of the challenges, one of the first hurdles I had to overcome was accepting the fact that I might not get water out of every single row on every single field. And it's never to the point to where I've seen it hurt my yield. Uh, but what I have noticed is that in the past with my conventional till, I would flood irrigate, and you could see the line in the soil to where the water would soak to. And I would very rarely would I be able to soak up to my plant. And what I did notice just even on the first year of cover crops was that my water infiltration would soak all the way to the plant and beyond. And so, yeah, it does take me a little bit longer than my neighbors to get my water out. But when I finally do, it's a very significant event. And I'm not going to be coming back in 3 days doing it again like they are. I can stretch out to 7 to 10 days, and then if I catch a rain in there somewhere, I'm going out even further where they're still, I've got a lot of neighbors that, they'll catch a half-inch rain on Monday, and on Wednesday they're firing their pumps up because they have not soaked any of that water in. And that's how it's been on our farm with our soil types.
All right, great. Couple questions regarding, some of the changes you've seen in terms of soil quality. One person is wondering if you took soil samples before you started working with cover crops and if you've seen any changes in those. And another person was wondering just in general what changes you've seen in terms of soil improvement.
So, one of we do soil sample quite a bit. The direction that we're heading to now is we're going to start using a test called the Haney test. And what that test will tell us is it will give us a baseline. We pulled some this year on some fields. We're dipping our toe into this test. We're getting some baselines on some fields, and then we're going to pull them again next year and the year after. And we're going to try to start tracking the health of our soil through the Haney test. And if I went into detail about everything that test covered, I would get it over my head really quick. But what guys can do is they can do some research on that test and find out for themselves what all it does. But the take home from that is there are ways to track the progress of your soil health. There are tests you can do. Solvita is another test. There's a phosphofatty or fatty acid test. But Rick Haney down in Texas has kind of got this thing going his direction. on monitoring his soil health. Just physically, just the old farmer walking out in his field. What do I notice physically about my soil? The first thing that will strike you is when you do take a shovel out there and you do dig, you will notice more earthworms. I noticed that within the first year. But I think just cutting out tillage can really boost that. But then when you bring a living root in and you start getting that biological activity all stirred up, it's just it's a different feel. It's a different smell. Farmers always. I don't know of a farmer that doesn't love the smell of of soil. And one of my favorite things was in the spring when we were bedding up our ground is the smell of that soil. And you know, this you can judge a soil's quality a little bit by the smell of it. I know that sounds a little old-fashioned, but the smell is improving, the texture is improving, and we're looking for that cottage cheese look to where it's not just looking like a flat brick. Whenever I take a shovelful and I open that soil up, I want there to be lots of porosity, lots of roots, both living and non-living roots. I want to see earthworms. I want to see life in my soil. And before, when I took a shovel load, you wouldn't see much life, if any at all. But it was an environment that was not conducive to life.
All right. Before I ask this next question, Johnny, we had someone who would like to see the equipment you showed again. Would you mind clicking back a few slides to show that? Okay, perfect. Thank you. Another question we have regarding cover crops is about termination. I know you talked about what herbicides you're using to terminate your cover crops. Can you talk a little bit about the timing of your termination, when you like to get those cover crops killed by, and any problems you've run into that or anything?
Oh, sure, we've had problems, but whenever obviously the not well, it's not obvious, but the first crop that's on our radar in southeast Missouri is going to be our field corn. That's our first cash crop that gets planted. And so the cover crop and the field associated with that is going to be the first thing on my radar. One of the things that I really want to do, though, I want to allow the cover crop to achieve its full potential. And what I mean by that is, I spend a lot of money on legumes, and I want them to produce nitrogen. And so if I roll in there on March 1st and I smoke that cover crop down, that cover crop did not have the chance to reach its full potential. And so what we're trying to do is base termination off of weather conditions and the maturity of the cover crop. If the weather conditions are bad, let's say it's March 15th and they take all rain out of the forecast and it looks like a really dry spring, well, then we're going to have to pull the trigger and we're going to have to terminate that cover crop. But if it's raining and we're getting good rains and things are progressing nicely and we're getting the temperatures that we need, those legumes to go to flower. I want them to bloom. That is usually kind of the old wives' tale of letting you know that that cover crop has reached its maximum nitrogen production. Especially when I use hairy vetch. We like hairy vetch in corn, and when I see that hairy vetch blooming, that tells me, hey, this thing's getting really close to being ready. And so usually within you know a week before to a week after of seeing my legumes bloom uh, is is what I try to do. Some of the mistakes we've made with cover crops on termination is trying to uh, maybe trying to spray too early in the morning whenever we don't have the temperatures and the sunlight that are best for termination. With annual ryegrass now, we spray from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. With cereal rye and barley and wheat or triticale, you can spray in those other hours, but whenever I go to spray annual ryegrass, it's going to be from 10 a.m. to 3 p.m. Because what I'm trying to do there is give it maximum time for that Roundup to translocate and select. So, and then we've made our fair share of mistakes, but that's a really important thing to get under your belt right there.
All right, great. This next question is again about cover crops before corn. I think this is probably regarding cereal rye, but this person that wrote in says that the residue seems to tie up nitrogen and he's having allopathy problems. Have you experienced that all on your farm, and do you have any suggestions for this grower?
So there's nitrogen problems and there are allelopathy problems. I've experienced problems, but do I know that it was allelopathy or do I know it was nitrogen? That I don't know. My suspicion is it was nitrogen. Uh, Talking to people who are a heck of a lot smarter than me and have been doing cover crops a lot longer than me, some of your veteran cover croppers use cereal rye almost exclusively in their areas because for their conditions it's the perfect fit. And they tell me they've never experienced a problem with allelopathy in corn. And so, that's on my radar, but more importantly, I want to make sure, and that's going back to why I went to start using the Stromoxone plus 28004. If I can carry that with about 15 gallons, I'm going to get, what, 40 plus units of nitrogen on top of that residue. And that's really going to start to break that residue down and help that cycle get started to where, before I would be putting, pop-up in my in-furrow plus, pre-emerge dry fertilizer, and I'm not convinced that it found that dry fertilizer. And then if you have a challenging spring and you can't get back in and side dress, you're talking about flying in more dry fertilizer, and you have the potential of continuing to tie up nitrogen. It's why we'd really like to knife in nitrogen, knife in liquid where we can, if not run drops, and get it out that way. But the carbon nitrogen ratio on your cover crops versus your cash crop is something you've got to pay attention to, especially with corn. If you get your carbon to nitrogen ratio too high in your cornfields, you could have season-long problems. And that's what growers have to educate themselves on. Because I mean, I've done it firsthand. I've had way too much carbon out there and not near enough nitrogen. But that could also be remedied by simply coming in and planting, more legumes, getting more nitrogen into that mix. But to answer this question, yes, I have. I've had corn set back, but you know, I don't blame the cover crop. I blame my management of the cover crop because the cover crop's there doing what it's doing, what it's going to do. I mean, it's got a job to do. It's going to do it, you know. And so it's all about how we manage that cover that determines the outcome.
All right, another question regarding herbicides. This person is wondering what herbicides you use for residual control that will not hurt the cover crop. Have you experienced any problems with herbicide carryover? And, do you have any suggestions on how to resolve that?
Yeah, and that's an area that we're working on right now. The University of Wisconsin has a really great piece of literature. They did a study on cover crops in respect to residual herbicides. That information can be found on the Midwest Cover Crops Council website. If you go to that website for Midwest Cover Crops Council and then you click on Wisconsin, that information should be right there on your screen somewhere in there. I've read that thing backwards and forwards. Now Wisconsin is where they did the study, and so their climate and their rainfall is different than mine, and so you kind of got to take that information and use a guideline, but maybe it's not the Bible. But what we are trying to do is we're trying to limit our use of foamosaphin. We're trying to you know, the chances are if a residual herbicide works really good for your cash crop, you're like, wow, I can't believe how clean my fields are. Chances are if it's that darn good, it's going to hurt your cover crop the next fall. and that's just kind of the catch-22. But at some point in time, you got to pull your pacifier out, and you got to get that big, thick cover crop in there and let that be your residual herbicide. And so when I'm burning down, I'm not putting, I'm putting verdict in here on some of these soybeans. I do that because our pigweed pressure is so high. But if I've got a perfect stand of cover crop, and I know I'm going to get a perfect mat, I might switch that verdict out for just straight sharpen. Uh, but we've gone to a product from BASF too called Outlook, and it's a residual herbicide, and it's got a pretty good rating on that. But we've gotten away from prefixed. We've tried to get away from like I don't know, Zidua, and those are great chemistries, and they work great, but they almost work too good. And so I've seen damage on my farm that I feel is herbicide carryover. And so, again, we're learning and we're just trying some different things. And I can't guarantee you that this time next year that I will have tried this plan and be right back to somewhere else. It just every year is different too, and so it's tough to chisel a plan in stone with cover crops and say, this is what I'm doing. I don't care what the consequences are. I don't care what happens. This is what I'm doing. My, my most successful cover crops and my most successful springs come when I'm able to adapt and roll with the changes. And I don't get married to a program to where, I get tunnel vision and I can't see the big picture. And it's easy to do that with cover crops because, you're watching the calendar, you're watching the weather, you're watching a cover crop, getting chest tall. You've got neighbors driving by your field calling, asking if your spray rig's broke down. You've got all these things happening, and it's easy to get locked up tight and lose focus of what's really important. But that's my soapbox for that.
All right. Another question we have is, about establishing cover crops is, do you fertilize your cover crops at any point?
I uh, I don't go out there. I didn't back. Let's go back here. This back here in the very beginning, whenever I first started, I uh, I would carry my cover crops with 50 pounds of potash, and I did that just trying to get the spreader buggy to spread the cover crop seed. A lot of times your scales on or your rate on a spreader buggy can't go down to, let's say, 15 pounds. They're just not designed to do it. And so you've got to mix something else in there to get your rate up. Well, 50 pounds of potash will do that. The airplane, I do not. Some of the spreader trucks I used last year, the spinner trucks, I had to run 50 pounds of potash because they couldn't get their trucks down tight enough to do the rate that I needed to do. Because sometimes when I'm doing like an annual ryegrass mix, sometimes I'm only spreading 15 to 20 pounds of product at most, and so you've got to keep that in mind. But right as of right now, I don't go out there and say I need to fertilize that cover crop. I feel the fertilizers are already out there. I spread that fertilizer this spring for my cash crop, and I know my cash crop did not take up all that fertilizer, and so that's where I'm at on that.
All right. This question is regarding your rotation. Someone was wondering if you're using cover crops before rice, and if so, what cover crop species are you using, and have you seen any issues with cover crops in your rice crop?
I am using cover crops ahead of my rice. This year, rice for us typically goes on our heaviest soil types. And so, going back to how I chose my covers, you know, I've got a heavy soil type prone to flooding. Well, that's rice ground. Well, I told you I'm going to annual ryegrass. And so that's what I did for the rice. There was parts of that program that I really liked. I did annual ryegrass, hairy vetch, and red clover and radishes. The radishes never really made it. I spread them too late. It got later in the fall, and I spread them anyways, thinking I could throw a Hail Mary, and it never works out. But one of the deals I did get into was I let this cover crop continue to grow this spring, and it got really, really big. It got over waist tall, which is pretty tall for annual ryegrass. And I came in and I burned down, and then that afternoon we got a rain right behind the spray room. And instead of just bucking up and saying, okay, we got to do this again, for lack of a better term, I sucked my thumb for a couple of weeks, hoping, hoping that the cover crop would go ahead and die. And then I came in and I no-tilled my rice into that in the meantime, expecting the cover crop to go ahead and die, and it did not. So then when I had to come back with my facet and my rice bow and my grandstand, whenever I came back with that, my cover crop was still trying to kind of take over, and it was shading out my rice. Now I got it all killed out with that next application, but it set that rice back about 2 weeks. Now on another 80 acres, I got the cover killed in a timely fashion. I got a good 100% kill, and it all worked like a dream. But that's very that's very typical with a cover crop. It doesn't take much mismanagement for things to go south. Now I will tell you that rice came back and it came through that cover, and it now looks as good as anything I've got. But I'll tell you what, there was some times there where I was really beginning to wonder, and it had me on the edge of my seat. But it taught me a valuable lesson. If your termination doesn't go to plan, don't stand around wondering. Go take care of business and get that stuff killed.
All right, and we are just about out of time, so we're going to get one more question in. One person is wondering why not apply your fertilizer in the fall after harvest with the cover crops. Is that something that you've done before or interested in trying?
I've done it before, and I don't have a thing in the world against it. I think it's a good idea, especially if you're going to spread some DAP, because there's some nitrogen out there for the cover. Uh, I think it's a fantastic idea. Why I don't do it, I don't know. Maybe I'm not smart enough. But you know, I think it's fantastic. If you're going to spread fall fertilizer, put it out with the cover. But what guys need to know is, and gals too, what you need to know is if you're going to mix cover crop seed with fertilizer, that stuff has got to go out the same day. Don't let your co-op blend up 1,000 acres of this stuff and sit it on a truck for 2 or 3 days if the weather turns south, because it will kill the germination on that seed. So and how do I know that? Because I've done it. I'm, you know, all these problems I'm talking about today, guys and gals, the problems that I've had aren't problems that I've heard about from somebody else. They're mistakes that I've made. And I continue to make mistakes, but I continue to learn. Just don't make the same mistake twice.
All right. Well, Johnny, thank you so much for answering those questions. Before we conclude, just a heads up that when you log off today, you will receive a questionnaire to complete. It's simple, easy to complete with a small number of questions, and your answers will help us determine the value of today's webinar and plan for future webinars. Second, we will be making available via email to you a replay of today's webinar in the event you'd like to go back and review the entire presentation or parts of the presentation. You'll also find that replay of the webinar up on our No-Till Farmer website shortly. There is an archive section on the website where you can go back and listen to other recently completed webinars. Finally, any questions we didn't get to this morning, we are going to share back with Johnny to answer. We will post those with the webinar replay as soon as they are available. Thanks again to Johnny for leading today's presentation, and I also want to thank Wayne Kaiser and Nick Bowers of KB Seed Solutions for sponsoring today's webinar. Also, thanks to Cole Vandermis, who was our producer for today's webinar. Thanks again for joining us, and we hope your crops are progressing nicely.